Well, on to this now. On Tuesday, South Africa again returning to the International Court of Justice to present its arguments on Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. Now, during its presentation, the South African ambassador to the Netherlands, Vusimuzi Madonsela, called for the immediate end to the occupation, describing it as more extreme than apartheid. Now, for more on South Africa's arguments, joining me is the ambassador himself, Ambassador Vusimuzi Madonsela, who joins us from The Hague. Ambassador, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Let's begin with why that kind of statement at the ICJ on the occupation of Palestinian territories by Israel. Very strong words that this possibly could be worse than what we saw in South Africa.
Good evening, Polly, and good evening to the viewers. That statement was absolutely necessary because in our estimation, some of the things that are happening in Israel within the territories of Palestine resemble what we have witnessed in South Africa, but in some instances we've seen extreme situations where Palestinian people are being subjected to very, very harsh treatment by the Israeli regime.
Yeah. Some people asking the question as to the current process, these hearings and the submissions of the more than 50 countries. How is this going to help with the current situation that holds in Gaza right now?
Well, perhaps it's important to explain the fact that these are two separate processes. The application that we brought under the Genocide Convention is quite distinct from the matter that is before the International Court of Justice at present. What is happening now is pursuant to a resolution of the General Assembly in December 2022, referring the matter to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. The court is being requested to opine on the legality or otherwise of the continued occupation of Palestinian territories by the Israeli state. In a sense, the court is not required to make a ruling because these are not contentious, it's not a contentious litigation matter.
Yeah.
But rather it is a request for an advisory opinion. Once the court has expressed an opinion on the matter, the General Assembly would, we hope, be sufficiently guided as to how then to best deal with the matter going forward.
If we look back to your genocide case at the ICJ, you went back for the second time to ask that court for more legal measures because Israel has simply pressed ahead with the bombardment. And the question that recurs is, can South Africa's ICJ case against Israel actually stop the war? Because it does not seem to be doing that at the moment.
It can stop the war, but the case alone would not be sufficient if it is not supported by permanent members within the UN Security Council, in particular the United States. As you may be aware, the United States, as late as yesterday, vetoed a proposed resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which effectively means that in the absence of a UN Security Council resolution, it would not be possible to take the matter beyond where we are right now, which means that we have to continue working with members of the UN Security Council to find language that gives all parties comfort until such time that everybody is happy to support a resolution calling for some kind of ceasefire. And that's basically where we are. But then the court has to press ahead with its work, and as you would have heard, pursuant to our communication to the court, requesting the court to use its own powers to consider further provisional measures. What the court did say was that it believed that its measures handed down on the 26th of January 2024 continue to be binding on Israel, and in fact that those measures extend to what is taking place in Rafah, which is within the area of jurisdiction of Gaza. So we believe that the court has heard our requests and in fact has clarified, if you like, the fact that its decision is still binding. But of course, the court on its own is unable to enforce its decisions. It requires the UN Security Council to play the role of enforcement, which is why I'm saying it is going to be important, therefore, that we get, especially the permanent members of the UN Security Council, to be comfortable with any proposed language in the text of the resolution proposing a ceasefire. And that's basically where our eyes are set at the moment.
That language is going to have to come soon, Ambassador Madonsela, because the worry, as you mentioned, Rafah, that is where that place is seen as the last refuge for Palestinian people. The United States itself has warned Israel to say, please don't embark on this ground invasion of Rafah, because that may have consequences, bad consequences. But here they are. You've just reminded us that they have vetoed a resolution that was meant to actually put in place a ceasefire. What will it take? What kind of language is going to appease those that stand with Israel?
Well, I suppose that's the question best to be responded to by the United States of America. You will have seen that all other states parties to the UN Security Council have in fact voted in favor. The United Kingdom abstained, and only the United States has voted against that resolution. Of course, as I said, we're focusing on the UN Security Council. We're working with members of the UN Security Council to make sure that we find some way of moving forward within that context. But equally, we are talking to other states outside the UN Security Council, and I'm sure you would have seen that gradually, even close friends to Israel have started calling for a ceasefire and cautioning against any ground invasion in Rafah. And we are pleased that, in fact, there is more and more support for the Palestinian situation. We are pleased that more and more countries are calling for a ceasefire, including some of those that in the past, in the General Assembly, voted against it. And we hope that the United States will increasingly realize that they are being isolated like a sore thumb within the UN Security Council and within the body of nations which are calling for peace at this time.
Is there any update, Ambassador Madonsela, from the ICC? So there is the ICJ, that's the International Court of Justice, and then there's the International Criminal Court. South Africa went there initially. Is there any update from that end?
Well, on the occasion of, on the day on which the ICJ was to hand down judgment, Minister Pandor led a delegation of South Africans, of which I was part, to visit the International Criminal Court, and we had a meeting with the president of the court as well as the prosecutor of the court. And in the engagement with the prosecutor assured us that he's put together a team and that investigations are in fact underway, and that he will keep us informed as to what developments are taking place there. And of course, that the judgment which the ICJ was to hand down was to be considered a very important component of the work that they have to take into account, especially insofar as provisional measures are concerned. And all that information is placed on the desk of the prosecutor. And our expectation is that all that information is being properly collated, evidence is being gathered, and we have expectation that sometime soon we will see some visible movement on the part of the International Criminal Court.
Can I conclude on this note, Ambassador Madonsela? And it takes us back to the initial question. South Africa making itself as an example of why it decided to take the lead in trying to protect the people of Palestine against Israel. And with that in mind, Ambassador, very interesting comments have been made in South Africa, not only by the Minister of International Relations, Minister Pandor, but by the President as well, around a possible fight back, if I can use that term. And interestingly, Minister Pandor went as far as to say she had asked the Minister of Police to beef up security around her and possibly her family. Do you have reason to worry about your own personal safety given the stance that South Africa has taken here?
Well, one has to be very careful as to what one does, where one goes, at any time. Not only because of the threats that have been made to the minister, but simply because we are dealing with a very delicate matter which attracts interest from all sorts of elements out there. So I'm not terribly concerned, but I am being cautious in whatever I do and wherever I go, because the primary responsibility for my security rests with me before I can invoke other forms of security should circumstances become necessary.
Ambassador Vusimuzi Madonsela, let me thank you very much for your time and indulging us this evening. Very, very important matter that South Africa is involved with here. Well, that's South Africa's ambassador to The Hague.